All right. Making sure our live streaming's working. All right. Here we go. Okay, everybody, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today at our roundtable about urban heat islands. I am here with a really wonderful panel that I'm very, very excited to introduce you with. Just to start off with, my name is Brittany Whitley. I serve as the Executive Director at Most Policy Initiative. And so I helped organize this event, and we're really, really excited to co-host this event with the Washington University Climate Change Program. So I want to turn it over quickly to my co-moderator, Dr. Laura Iannotti, and also Beth Martin at WashU to introduce themselves and the WashU Climate Program.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Iannotti, and I'm an associate professor at Washington University in St. Louis. I'm also director of the E3 Nutrition Lab, and I do research as relates to food systems, climate change, and environmental sustainability. I'm a member of the executive committee for the WashU Climate Change Program, and I'm going to let Beth turn it over to her so she can introduce that program.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, all. I'm Beth Martin. I'm a teaching professor at Washington University in St. Louis in the Environmental Studies program, and also serve as director of our climate change program. So we're really honored to be able to co-host this event today. One of the priorities of our program, along with strengthening curriculum and research, is outreach and engagement, both in the WashU community and outside of the WashU community in St. Louis and Missouri, regionally, nationally. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be able to support and be part of the discussion. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Beth. All right, so let's get into it. I think the reason you're all here is to hear from our really wonderful panelists. And so I want to start by introducing them. We're going to go through quickly, and each panelist is going to have about 3 minutes to chat about why they're here, the work that they do, and then we'll get into questions. Just a couple housekeeping items. Again, as a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be available afterwards. We also ask that everybody keep their mics muted until the Q&A part. Then if you want to ask a question, turn on your video, feel free to do so. All right, so let's start off with our panelists. I first want to introduce Dr. Fengpeng Sun. He's a climate scientist at UMKC. He also sits on our advisory council for the Local Science Engagement Network here at Most. Dr. Sun, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more and talk about some of your work briefly? Oops, we lost sound for you. Okay, Dr. Sun, your sound is still not working. I'm going to switch over to Brenden Shane, and then we'll come back to you.
Brittany, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks, Brenden. So
okay.
This is Brenden, the climate director with the Trust for Public Land.
Yeah, thanks so much. So it's really a privilege to be with you all. I'm sort of maybe the odd man out. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., not in Missouri, but through AAAS and Most, we got connected to you all, and really pleased to talk about the issue, which is really, bubbling up for us all over the country. Obviously, it's been an extreme year heat-wise. It's been a string of extreme years heat-wise, and so TPL is working across the country to create parks and protect public lands, and generally in the business of advancing greener communities, bringing more nature into communities. And so obviously there's a really strong nexus in what we focus our work on nationally is kind of that question: to what extent can we be using nature as a tool to combat what's really almost at a crisis level for some communities already, and the trajectory for increased heat in our communities all across the country. Obviously this year all the way up to our northern borders and into Canada. This is a real challenge for communities going forward. I was going to just mention a couple of things I think Josh will drop in later, and they may come up in the conversation. But I think the reasons we're here is we've used one of our national platforms called the ParkServe database, and I think they'll put a link into that. That's a really, it's a park-focused database for communities, but it's really almost every community in the country. So across Missouri, you'll find that Any community above about 2,500 people should be in this database. And that now includes an urban surface heat database, urban data layer for all those communities. And it's really an interesting tool that if you go into ParkServe, type in your community and take a look at the climate data that shows up there, you'll see that urban heat. And I think that becomes a really useful tool we'll talk about later. Visualizing this problem and how it's dispersed across a community, how it varies, and in particular, how it's very often is going to affect those who are in low income and communities of color disproportionately, is really one of the critical issues tied into the heat issue.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Brenden. And so next, let's go to Laura Ish, who is the Sustainability Manager for the City of Kansas City. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Ish. I'm in the City Manager's office, in the Office of Environmental Quality with the city. And pretty much my work is all things sustainability in Kansas City, Missouri, and that's planning, implementation, and collaboration, which is really necessary when you're trying to do this work from a city perspective on a limited budget. Kansas City's been in the climate business since about 2008 with our first climate protection plan, but that was literally just a mitigation plan. How do we stop putting carbon into the air? And we realized that over time, though we did meet some of our goals, that we had to move past that and into planning for resiliency and adaptation as well. And which is really exciting because resiliency brings the heat island aspect into this whole process. So we started updating our plan in 2020. Kansas City has a goal to be climate neutral by 2030 for city operations and 2040 for citywide as a whole. And as part of that, we're also doing a community risk and vulnerability assessment to make sure that we're targeting our climate strategies in those neighborhoods that most need it, which is awesome for me. I'm a 17-year city veteran, and my entire approach has always been melding the data with the lived experience, because both are incredibly valuable in creating climate planning efforts and really any city planning efforts to have input and buy-in from the citizens. So super happy to be here. Learn more from all these other folks. I'm already on ParkServe, realizing I'd visited that before. So thanks for that shout out.
Fantastic. And next, let's chat with Doug Cluck, who is the Central Region Climate Services Director for NOAA.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I don't know if I'm the odd man out or not, but I'll be the odd man just because I am. I also sit in Kansas City, so I know Laura a little bit through her boss mostly, and several others of you look familiar. I represent, or my region, if you will, is basically goes from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountains, and that's 16 states. It's a lot of different states with a lot of different programs, a lot of sustainability, and a lot of resiliency, and a lot of adaptation. So I work across timescales, though. So anything from about 2 weeks into the future to 100 years is sort of the kind of question, level of question that I receive. I'll put it that way. And the kind of collaboration and coordination that I do across federal, tribal, state, county, city type of folks. Most of the people want information, and they want information that it needs to be either translated or I'll just say interpreted, because there's so much out there and it's very confusing to the layperson to grapple, I would say. And so when it comes to underserved communities or vulnerable communities, probably a better way to say it, especially under this administration, it is a major push. I'm trying to not be an advocate here too much. I'm just telling you what's going on in the administration, and I think you're all aware of that. It's great working with Feng Peng this year and making sure that Kansas City got a teeny bit of funding to do their study on urban. We do I just talked about our 2-week to 100-year in the future type thing. One thing we do in the real time, in terms of climate, is talk about what is happening here and now. So we do a monthly webinar, and at some point I'll put it in the chat how you might link up to that if you want to hear about the entire north central part of the U.S. and what's going on in the climate realm, if you will. And what could be coming in the relatively near future, let's say 3 to 6 months in the future. So right now, I really can't go too much into detail because the information will be coming out later, but right now we're in a La Nina watch. What does that mean? Why do we care? Does that mean that we're going to burn up or we're going to drown? We'll explain that all after tomorrow when the official release comes out. Okay, so that's what I call real-time climate stuff, but it's important because real time is what is affecting people here and now, especially in urban cores. One more thing I do want to mention before I sign off is to say urban core is where the focus is, but rural areas also are experiencing issues with heat. And there are a lot of people in the agricultural industry, for example, or migrant workers who are exposed to this heat as well. A great example of that, and this is the last thing I'll say, a great example of that was this year on the West Coast, especially in the Northwest. And migrant workers severely impacted actually by 100 to 120 degree temperatures, which is unheard of for that time of year. So I'll stop there for the moment.
Thanks so much, Doug. All right, Dr. Sun, do we have your audio back?
All right, are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, second try, that's great. Actually, you know what, it's my second time to be in the roundtable panel. I think back in this spring, I was here and also Doug was here. We talked about extreme weather and climate change. Looks like the Zoom system wanted me log in twice to make sure that it's my second time to be here. All right, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to see some faces of old friends, and we'll call some new friends as well. My name is Fenpen Sang. I'm currently an assistant professor at UMKC, Department of Earth Environmental Sciences. Myself is a climate scientist. I use climate models to study what happened in the past. And most importantly, we want to know what might be happening in the future. We call it climate change projections in the future. And I have been studying the urban heat island in Kansas City metropolitan area, I think ever since about three years ago. Our group, we applied the high resolution regional climate model to investigate the urban heat island in Kansas City metro area and also its impacts. And also we have also been doing some research by looking into some proposed mitigation strategies, such as cool roofs. And we're trying to quantify the potential of cool roofs in reducing the excessive heat, especially in the urban core areas. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to learn also from the other panelists as well.
Thank you so much. All right, I will start us off with our first question and then turn it over to Laura to keep the questions going. So I wanted to start off with Doug, actually. So Doug, you mentioned how a lot of your job is helping translate science to people who maybe have a hard time understanding or sifting through all of the information that they're seeing. And so I was wondering if, to start us off, if you could talk about how you describe urban heat islands to people who maybe aren't familiar with the concept, and then also how you talk about how climate change is related to the concept of, or the phenomenon of, urban heat islands.
Well, it's kind of a universal statement on how one gets people to understand almost any concept, urban heat island or anything else in the climate or science realm, is base it on their experience if you can. Well, that's why it's so important to know your audience and what they care about, right? I don't always hit the nail on the head. I know it. I know I don't. When people kind of look at you funny or they don't ask questions, which probably will happen here. But in terms of urban heat island, I I would ask them questions like, do you ever notice when you're driving in the core of, or in the summertime in downtown Kansas City, for example, do you ever notice on your car what the temperature is? And then if you live in the suburb or if you live in an area with a lot of trees, how that temperature drops? Now, I'm a geek, so I notice those things, right? I know I live in North Kansas City, and if I'm in downtown or somewhere around there, there's a lot of concrete and such. I simply say, I know when I drive home, it's going to be five degrees cooler. Oh, in most cases, right? Especially in the summertime. Most people, I mean, that's enough. Usually people just understand. And I don't go into, well, it depends on what building materials you're building and all. I say where there's trees, where there's grass, where there's crops, it tends to be cooler than in the middle of a city with all the concrete. I mean, I don't know how else to translate urban heat islands. They've always been around, and there's always been deaths from urban heat islands for lots of reasons. Stagnant air, long periods of heat, that low temperatures don't go beneath a certain temperature or threshold. Those have been around forever, but now we're adding yet another layer to that in terms of, and I can't tell you if we're adding 5 or 10 or 20% more today. We can look at projections for the future to give a little more idea of what that may be, but all I can say is it's getting worse and likely to be worse. But many cities have taken action to remediate to minimize some of the damage, I would say. And Chicago's a great example. I mean, but they're not done. People still have issues, right? What was your other question?
Nope, you got both of them. You got both of them okay. In that. So how to talk about urban heat islands and climate change, because this is something I think a lot of our listeners, we're trying to connect people with. How do you engage with your lawmakers and talk to them about things that they're probably not expert in? So I think that's a really fantastic way to do so.
Yeah, I would just maybe jump in to mention that actually through the work NOAA has funded and then some of the work we've done, I just emphasize visualization of that, right? That there is the descriptions Doug was just talking about and sort of the visuals like walking down that the concrete jungle, the lack of trees. But we've really found that having that map, and I'd be curious to know, like Laura and others, what that shows that spatial variation across the city, and people can see their neighborhood and other neighborhoods. It's hugely powerful when talking to decision makers. So it's all for that the ParkServe database, but other tools as well that get even much more detailed and or maybe have more local data, like Dr. Sun is looking at. They can be really powerful when visualized, and just that one pager of this is what our heat looks like can get people's attention.
That's actually related to the question I wanted to ask. I actually have so many questions. What an amazing panel. So let me start with maybe the field or the discipline that I know best, which is public health. So this is really a question for any of you, but maybe we could start with Laura to talk about what are the most important public health implications of urban heat islands, and what populations do you see as being, I mean, I think we know with health equity, the populations we need to focus on, but are there others we should be paying attention to in terms of this issue?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And honestly, our health department has been tracking deaths due to urban heat issues and high heat issues for quite a long time. And the heat deaths are usually exacerbated by other illnesses. We see issues a lot with the elderly, even people that have, strong asthma responses as well. And from a city perspective, the hardest part is that the people that are usually we were talking about maps earlier and the importance of maps. And one of our things is overlaying the heat island maps on maps of our low income populations and our immigrant populations and our populations of color. And overlaying those maps, we see that the heat islands usually land right in the areas where our most vulnerable populations are located. And that sort of from a health perspective, especially low income, is really a problem in Kansas City. So their energy burden is high anyway. Their housing stock is aging and they can't afford repairs to it. And then there's this huge heat island. They don't have trees to mitigate the heat. They don't have good, strong air conditioning to mitigate the heat. And that's where we really start to see those health issues come in, is with those folks. And then, of course, populations that are just unhoused, and which we don't have a whole lot of data on because they are unhoused. But we know that, you know, they tend to congregate in areas in groups where they're safe and in groups where they have access to things. And that tends to be in the urban core where there's just a lot of heat. So there's a very strong correlation between the populations of concern from a climate perspective, their health, and urban heat islands. I don't know if I answered all of it there for you.
Very much so, yes, comprehensive answer. Brittany, do we have questions in the chat, or do you have a question?
Yeah, we do have one question in the, oh, Brenden, go ahead, and then we'll do the question.
I'll chime in occasionally here with the nature side of it, but Lara mentioned it. In addition to that, you know, the point she mentioned, you know, I think that people don't often realize that, you know, tree canopy in particular, but just sort of natural surfaces overall, really do just like they're good at filtering out air pollution, right? So they have all these other benefits. And often you'll go seek a tree out just to stay cooler when it's so hot. But you know, you're seeing pollution levels climb when the heat is high, ozone levels and things like that, particulates. So you know, building that strong tree canopy and sort of, you know, integrating nature into community, you know, over generations, you know, will pay a significant dividend down the road in terms of air quality. And the health benefits, you know, related to that.
No, I think that's really important to highlight, but also, you know, over the weekend, there was an op-ed, I think in the New York Times, about mental health and those we can't forget about that aspect or that dimension of public health that trees and parks can provide. So it's a real
Yeah, and yeah, we thank you for pointing that out. You're helping to make a couple of points I'm forgetting to make. You're right. Mental health is one, and then also sort of, you know, we talk a lot about sort of the social cohesion, and folks talk about resilience and surviving heat, right? That it's not just the heat; it's like how strongly, you know, integrated and how supportive is your community, and a lot of that has to do with those important public institutions that, you know, it's not just parks. It's, you know, it may be houses of worship, it may be recreation centers and libraries and things like that. But how well does your community know each other so that they can provide the social support that you know can really prevent deaths and illness in extreme heat?
Fantastic. All right, so I want to get to one of these questions that's in the chat that is also related to a question that I had for Feng. And so this is one of the things that I was hoping, Dr. Sun, that you could talk to us about is a little bit more details about some of the mapping projects you've done in Kansas City. I know a couple members of our group were able to actually go out and help do some of those measurements, which was fantastic. But we have someone in the chat here that also asked, is there an ongoing or near future project to do on the ground mapping of climate variables in St. Louis? And so after you talk a little bit about your work, if you or Lara maybe want to talk a little bit about maybe how you can share what you're doing in Kansas City with St. Louis. I think the person who asked the question saw the recent St. Louis Post-Dispatch article about how cities are gathering data about unequal urban heat and asking St. Louis to join in.
All right, great. Yeah, let me first start with, first of all, I want to thank you to Missouri Local Science Engagement Network. Actually, you guys are a great partner with us, along with 7 other organizations. Great partners, including, we have the local governments. We have Kansas City, Missouri Office of Environmental Quality, Laura is there. And also we have nonprofits such as Bridging the Gap. We also have some private sectors such as utility company Evergy. Without all your help and support, this campaign could not be such successful. I really want to first of all thank all of them. The campaign you mentioned that we call the Kansas City Urban Heat Mapping Campaign. As you know, this is I'd like to say this is a coordinated cohort campaign, which is part of the network of the several campaigns across the US this summer. The heat mapping campaign is mainly funded by a federal government agency like NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. Actually, it was coordinated by the NOAA's partner, which is a third party named the Climate Adaptation Planning and Analytics. We call it CAPA Strategies. And luckily, Kansas City I think Kansas City is lucky because we are the only one right in the middle of the country, hotline the country, who is funded by NOAA this year. We already finished the campaign about 2 months ago. We launched the campaign to map the heat, how the heat is going to be distributed across the KCMO. Our campaign was done by all the volunteers across the KC metro areas. Some of them are from UMKC. Some of them, I think most of them are recruited with the help from our partner Bridging the Gap. There are about 90 volunteers registered on the campaign. And eventually on the campaign day, which is August the 6th, that's about almost 60 volunteers showed up help us. The main theme of the campaign is to show and study how the excessive warming pattern is distributed in the cities. For our campaign, we mainly focus on the KCMO, but we only focus on the Jackson County, which is about 80 square miles of total area. The idea is that we first divided the whole area into 10 different sub areas, or we call the polygons. And we have a group of volunteers. Each group of volunteers, basically 2 volunteers. One is the driver, the other one is the navigator. And then we cover one of the small polygon. The volunteers mounted their, we call the pre-designed heat sensor equipment on the car, on the passenger window side. And then they drove around the pre-designed routes. And then they collect the real-time heat data set, including the surface air temperature, the humidity, and also with the GPS track the heat sensors every 1 second. And also we collect the data actually 3 times, 3 hours. The first hour is in the early morning, which is from 6 to 7 a.m. And then we do another one in late afternoon from 3 to 4 p.m. And the last one is in the early evening from 7 to 8 p.m. The campaign itself, it was a great success. And now we collected all the data sets. And because those sensors are provided by CAPA and NOAA, actually after the campaign, we sent back all the instruments back to CAPA because they're going to reuse all, those instruments for the other cities. The data will be analyzed by NOAA and the CAPA, and those data sets, the data set collected by our volunteers will be combined with satellite imageries. And with the hope, we want to develop the high resolution urban heat map of the measure of the area that we are interested in. I have been, during the past few weeks, I have been working with them. The target is that we are going to get the results back, and also we're going to get kind of a small report. And hopefully, currently we haven't received the report yet. It was my hoping that, before out today's event, hopefully I'm going to be able to share, but unfortunately we haven't got the results yet. But since you are one of the partners, definitely we are going to share the result with you, and hopefully you're going to be able to share with all the participants today. That's pretty much about our campaign. So hopefully this gives you some kind of idea about how this is going to be done. I'm more than happy to talk with people from St. Louis. Actually, the last time we have a cohort meeting, someone said, okay, St. Louis is desperately want to join in for next year. So definitely, we are here to help. I'm very happy. Laura is here. We are more than happy to help you out.
Does anybody else on the panel want to speak to thinking about outside of Kansas City, how to maybe use and leverage the strategies that this team in Kansas City has been able to do in order to maybe Brenden some of this national mapping that y'all are doing across the entire country?
It's a great sales. I mean, when I originally saw this in Virginia Beach or wherever I saw it in Norfolk, somewhere in Virginia, I thought, wow, this is easy. This is an easy sell. I would think city leaders would jump all over this. So I would say that first.
Yeah, and I would just add that I think it may have been Richmond where this started, because that not too far from us here. And yeah, we saw some of that early work, some of the city sustainability staff and others, and working with the universities there. Yeah, I agree that the faster they can roll that out to more cities, the better, right? People really are, I think, clamoring for that. But I think that we also have a question of like, always have the question of how much data is the right amount of data? How much detail do you really need to dig in and start making some policy level decisions? And I think that, so there's the heat data you'll find for each community that's in Parkshire is limited, right? This is satellite remote sensed, it's 30-meter resolution, it's surface temperature, so it's not air temperature. But, and so it has certain limitations and certain uses. But it's actually pretty good at pointing out, and you go into a community, you can see the big box store with the black roof in the parking lot is just a big heat island, right next to this residential neighborhood, and then the downtown core and things like that show up very well with the data that you have. And so I think that getting more detailed and better information is critical. But I think a lot of what local community leaders can be doing now, you can make the case with information that's available already, and try to ideally with these types of solutions, many of the heat solutions are long-term solutions, right? This is changing your building codes to have lighter roofs. It's beefing up and investing in the nature and the urban tree canopy, and it's going to take a decade or two to really start, seeing the full benefits of some of those investments. Obviously, you can invest in cooling and water features and various things like this sooner. But the more you can get the ball rolling on the big picture policy changes that you want to see, the better. And a lot of that you can do now with data that's available.
Well, one other thing I'll add, just real quickly, as I spoke just briefly about minimum temperatures. It's not always the heat during the day that is the problem, and this is sort of getting, and it really health people should speak up now, because I'm getting out of my my specialty here. But what my understanding is, well, my understanding on minimum temperatures are those generally are rising a bit faster than the maximum temperatures. There's a lot of reasons for that. Basically, that we have more moisture in the air in a lot of areas, especially east of, let's say, Missouri River east part of the country. Thus, we're not, when you just look at average temperature or average high temperatures in the summer, really in the southeast part of the U.S., you're not seeing this steep incline like you are further north, let's say, in Minneapolis or even in the West. What you are seeing, though, are minimum temperatures creeping up, and it's the fact that humans aren't allowed to breathe, if you will, and their bodies cool off, that really causes the problem over a period of days. Now, it depends on the human how long that takes for them to really have problems. But it's almost like putting a frog in a pot. You don't know that you're heating up. You don't know. You turn a fan on or something like that. So there's this whole social science angle that we're not. I don't know if we're starting to talk about that, but we ought to at some point in terms of urban heat islands and the dangers from the heat, right?
I would just mention that I'm glad, Laura, you mentioned the health angle on this. I have a colleague, and actually several colleagues, that are public health people, right? And so they're looking at this. A lot of times people call me thinking, oh, this is a climate issue, and then we quickly turn over and say, well, no, this is a public health issue, right? It's both, but the impacts are public health. And one example, I'll put in the chat. There's a rating system called City Health, and I think it previously was maybe the 40 largest cities in the country. They're going to expand that this year. I think it will include, or already include, St. Louis and Kansas City. But they sort of are proposing and promoting policies. Some of them are maybe tobacco related, and some of them are other things. But they're about to add for the first time a green space and public health metric, which is basically going to be sort of availability of parks, extensiveness, tree canopy extent, and things like that, because of their impact on public health. And so I'll put that in the chat, but it's just another indication of the way that these, this is not a heat metric, it's a greenness metric, but as everyone's explained, they're pretty much, one and the same.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to a really important point, which is that so many of these issues can converge and have this sort of exponential effect. When you overlay the problems, especially, you're going to see these health implications. I did have a question. I'm sort of curious. I've lived in several cities in my life, I would say, and although I did grow up in Missouri and in the Midwest, and one thing that strikes you when you compare cities in the Midwest and in Missouri is space, not the spatial dimensions we're talking about here, but just space. We have more space, certainly Kansas City, but also St. Louis when compared to DC, for example. Do any of the panel members see that we should leverage this opportunity? Are there ways that we can leverage this, towards mitigating the urban heat island problem? Green space is obvious, but maybe there are other ways that we can think about space that we have in the Midwest for addressing this problem.
I guess I could weigh in. It looks like Brenden wants to, though. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead. You have the local context.
Well, and green space is important. One of the other things that Kansas City's been focusing on is they recently just passed the urban tree master plan here with the emerald ash borer, along with other situations, have really decreased our tree canopy, and trying to get that back to where it was and even expand it is going to be huge. The other thing with these spaces that are important is, we're looking to make resiliency hubs. That's something we're hoping comes out of our climate planning process. Just spaces where people can gather, get information, especially when we have digital divide, places they feel comfortable and safe, that they can get away from the heat. And it'd be great if we had those in every neighborhood, instead of people having to find transportation to a community center or a pool, or even a place of worship. It'd be great if we could leverage some of that space, and even some of our vacant lots. That would be a wonderful thing if we could make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of those points, obviously, shifting to more canopy and green space is one. Water, access to water, whether it's natural or the pool or the water feature or the park, the spray park, and those types of things, increasingly can be, people are talking now about misting centers and these types of things. If you have the water to use, which, Missouri is lucky to have a decent amount of water, maybe, those are options. The others, this may actually go counter, but I'll put in some information about what they call the Smart Surfaces Coalition, and it's really an effort to cool surfaces. They call it smart because it is smart, but they're really focused on the surfaces, and that's actually maybe an area where you have a little bit of more of an issue, right? You have more space, and frankly, a lot of that's paved. So to Doug's and Laura's point about that urban heat island, thinking hard about how much you're paving and what color and what materials you're using for those pavements. Cities, I think Los Angeles is just rolling out, and some others are rolling out, new pavement coatings to try to cool down those hard surfaces, and obviously roofs. So I don't know if that's a good thing for the Midwest, or that there's more of that to you, but in theory, the city and town departments of transportation and others can play a big role in some of this cooling.
So I have a question, but I love that we're starting to talk about mitigation strategies, and it sounds like I see a lot of heads nodding as people talk about green space and cool roofs and cool surfaces. what are some of the barriers that we encounter kind of trying to implement these research-based, these science-based policy challenges that we're seeing? Kind of what is the reason why we don't just have a ton of green space right now and everybody has a cool roof? What are some of those kind of real life actionable barriers that are kind of in the way right now? Anyone can take this.
Well, I can take it from a city perspective. Kansas City is 319 square miles with a population base of about 500,000 people. And we look at other major cities where it's very much more dense. There's a lot more taxes going into the process. Therefore, there's a lot more programs that can be done. I know just in the process of greening and looking for places to put trees as part of the urban tree canopy, we really can only put trees in the spaces the city owns and is responsible for. But we have to only put as many trees as we can afford to take care of and nurture to grow them up. And as with waning city budgets, especially with the recent pandemic, that kind of falls on the wayside with more important social programs that are out there, like renters assistance and making sure people are housed. Those issues are really big. So, I mean, it's a money thing, but it's also finding for us, and we're hoping this also comes out of the climate plan, is finding the right partners that can get people on board with these things. You talk about cool roofs, and a lot of people have no idea what you're talking about, and they don't even realize they could put it on their property. Green roofs for businesses, that's not something that's, really big here. It could be. So it's an education. It's finding the right partners. People are always afraid somebody's gonna, sell them some snake oil with these kind of things. So just having those folks on board to help with the process, and those partners and people that really know their stuff, that are willing to get involved and partner with cities and philanthropies for sure on the value of these things.
Yeah, or Doug, did you want to chime in? I'm talking a lot.
I'm not the specialist on this, but it seems to me that smart development is key as well. And I don't even know what I mean by smart development other than turning green space into concrete. So I'll leave that up to the city people and others to address that a little bit. And what steps are being taken perhaps along those lines.
Yeah, and smart development is huge. And right now, Kansas City is actually updating their comprehensive plan as well. That's a big 20-year document. That's kind of how we're going to grow for the next 20 years. So it's super important that we get input into that plan, that this kind of thing is important, because we need to make sure we are developing so we have spaces for people to be cool. And so we're avoiding urban heat island in the new areas we're putting in. You look in the Northland, which is our very green, kind of vast space, but you still see these heat island impact areas, and they're the large shopping centers, just like you were talking about, with lots of asphalt. How do we create policy? We have to have the political will to create policy that will help drive those things forward. And a big thing that can help at the city level is just having that policy at the state level. That this is just kind of some guidance. So we're not the bad guy that's trying to prevent development or make this so expensive that people can't afford it. That there's just a uniform policy that everybody follows would be wonderful to have.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. There's a couple of points that were mentioned. I should actually mention that as I was poking around a few towns in Missouri on ParkServe, so the big boxes show up with the parking lots. But I should say it's the big box with a dark roof and a dark parking lot that shows up. You can often find cases where immediately next door is a large big box with a white roof, a highly reflective roof, and the smaller footprint or a different, maybe more trees in the parking lot, has a completely different heat footprint. And so it's not necessarily the big box. It's really, some of these are relatively small tweaks in how it's built and how it shows up in the building code, which may be, I don't know actually if that's set at the state level for Missouri as it is in some states, but yeah, making those changes can be huge and yeah, take the pressure off locals. I'll also emphasize, Laura mentioned that money is a huge issue. All of this comes down to various forms of funding, it seems. But I'll just mention, and I'll put in the chat, there parks we're very familiar with, but tree canopy in general have been chronically underfunded, right? So if you look at spending in communities on parks and trees over the last few decades, you just see it dropping and dropping. And then you see the recession in 2008, it goes way down, never recovers the way it should have. And then some of that continues. And so, but interestingly, when we do a lot of ballot measures as well around the country, and when you look at, going to the voters to ask for if they support this, they overwhelmingly support this. Red states, blue states, deep red states, people will vote 2/3, 3/4 in support of more trees and more green space. So it has popular support. And what I'll put in the chat here is also a federal effort that's going on right now. There's major money in the federal infrastructure and Build Back Better bills proposals for to dramatically increase the amount of federal support that flows to states and then to communities for urban and community forestry, which gets a pittance every year in the current budgets. So there's billions of dollars that's proposed to flow down to communities to help with some of this, and hopefully reverse that trend of reducing funding for these things when ideally you'd be increasing funding.
And I'd just like to add on top of that there is support. And the other thing is the business case for this. This is great for developers. If you're going to put in a big box store, I'm always the one searching for the tree to park under in a hot day. So is everyone else. Having those trees there makes it someplace people want to go. Having that roof on there that's reflective helps lower your utility bills. There's a good business case for doing this. We just have to make sure that we can get the right people at the table to see the science and that it is a good business case.
So I have a question that's related to a lot of these points that are being made. Maybe even to start with Dr. Sun. I'm curious, from the point of view of professor and teacher, what are the skills that we should be imparting on our students for addressing these problems? Are they the sort of soft skills of, partnership that Laura mentioned, and, translation that Doug was talking about in terms of communication? Are they the engineering skills that we need most? What should we be mobiling? Our youth are so energized by these issues. I'm sure that this is, in this generation, they are ready to take action. So how do we train them for this?
Sure, let me try to tackle it. Yes, I agree with you. It's super important to, to get everyone involved, especially, the younger generations. And nowadays, urban heat island is just part of the, global climate change we are talking about. I mean, it's really a good idea to educate people, not only the young people, but everyone in the community, that when we talk about climate change, most of the time when we see in the media, people show a polar bear stranded in a piece of small ice. That happened really far away, too abstract to us. However, the idea, I'm so happy that, Brittany and you guys talk, we bring in the urban heat island. We want to just let everybody know that climate change, we talk about, no matter you are from a red state or blue state, it is happening, right? And really, it's not really happening only in the Arctic, in the higher mountains, right, in the glaciers. Actually, it is happening in our backyard. It's kind of become a challenge to our community, no matter, you acknowledge it or not. Some people say, okay, I don't believe climate change is induced by people, by human beings. It's okay, but you need to acknowledge the fact that, okay, it is happening, right? And that's very important. Actually, we need both accurate, I'd like to say both accurate science, and also we need some kind of very wise policies, trying to convert the scientific findings and the scientific, development into some kind of thing very important for the general public to understand, to be educated, and most importantly, to be involved.
Thank you.
And if any of our other panelists wanted to add on to that, otherwise we're getting close to time. And so I wanted to do a call for questions. If anybody who's in our audience is interested in asking a question we haven't got to yet, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 audience questions. You can either put that in the chat or unmute yourself and ask directly, whichever you prefer. Practicing my long pauses.
Brittany, I'll just mention, and I'm going to put, I'm filling up the inbox here, but or the chat, but I'll just mention to Dr. Sun's point, the getting local data and those projections. We often reference work done by the Union of Concerned Scientists. They have a report and then a tool, so you can do, again, I think they may cut off at cities of 50 or 25,000, called Killer Heat. And you put that in and it will give you, science-based estimates of the increased heat at 2030, 2050, 2100, how many days over 100 per year. And they're pretty stunning numbers. And sometimes they're too much for people to even handle. The idea that you may, go from 10 days a year over 100 to 70 days over 100, in the lifetime of like my children, it's pretty stunning. But it's a great resource. I'll put a link to it, and I'll just say that it's very useful with the right audiences or when presented the right way, because sometimes people who are not inclined to believe just won't believe it. But that's an opportunity as well to educate. Oh yeah, thank you for putting that in.
I'm not seeing other questions, and so I'm going to use the last question before we do takeaways to ask a question that I have, which is, so one of the main mitigation strategies we're talking about is maybe updates to buildings, whether that's on the roof or the surfaces, or whether that's weatherization to make the utilities a little bit more efficient. What are the policy implications for that when a lot of the people who are most affected by this extreme heat don't actually own the buildings that they're living in? And so they might not be able to take advantage of, let's say, a tax credit for homeowners to redo the roof or something like this. Any of you can really speak to this, but just thinking about how to best serve the underserved populations that might be directly impacted by this.
I just wanted to say, it looked like Zach had his hand up to ask, Zach Miller, did you have your hand up to ask a question too on that?
Yeah, but you can answer Brittany's first.
Well, and honestly, that is a really good question. And that's something we're really trying to figure out through our climate planning process, is how we do have a lot of tenants, and there's this huge landlord tenant divide, whereas the landlord doesn't feel the need to make the upgrades because they're not paying the bill, and then the tenant is overburdened. And so that is a really slippery slope on how we figure that out. And one of the strategies we're looking at is how to incentivize those changes, and even looking at possible policies that to require some of these changes, to require just a minimum level of efficiency that needs to be in rental properties. I can't say that's going to come out in the climate plan. We are doing this as an equity community-based plan. So the community is the one weighing in, and that includes our tenants and our landlords to figure out the strategies that work best for Kansas City. But I know that's one of the things we're really looking at, is how to incentivize those changes, especially when we have a utility burden of like 8%, 8.4% on our low income populations of their income in Kansas City. We're in the top 10. That's no place we want to be, especially with the urban heated island issues that we have.
Yeah, it's a really critical question because and the solutions are difficult. But actually, Zach, I know you had a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit about like the availability of resources. And I'm curious to know if there's any like centralized location online for all of these efforts that are being done that talk about what programs are in place, what plans are, what institutions are working towards what goals for Missouri in particular, because I know our state does not have a statewide climate action plan, and it is, I think, probably pretty unlikely that we'll see something like that within the next few years or longer. So I didn't know if any of you had any suggestions like a centralized hub to kind of coalesce all of this energy towards like one bigger working group or location. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'll just mention, that's a good question. I should have put some of these things before, but Brittany, maybe you can share them. There are a couple of, really interesting groups. I don't know if the NIHHIS, the National Heat something information. I think that's NOAA perhaps, but there's also a group out of the University of Arizona that hosts the Extreme Heat Network. So there's a few clearinghouses for some of this information that we could share. That it's not Missouri specific, so I don't think exactly we get to your questions about moving Missouri specific work, but
yeah, although I'm in NOAA, I'm loosely linked to the health and climate folks. Loosely linked to a lot of things, but I put in there the toolkit, the Climate Resilience Toolkit, which you may or may not have ever seen. We've somewhat we're in the process of regionalizing it. You can see some of the regions that are mentioned in there. I think there's a Northern Plains. These are all based on the National Climate Assessment, something else we could have a 10-hour discussion about. There's a Midwest section, so unfortunately, Kansas City sits right on the edge. But the point is, it is a clearinghouse. The two administrations ago, we were asked strongly to combine all the efforts from all the feds into one place. But it has grown beyond that, so that it's beyond federal. It's really, if you're an NGO, you'll probably see some of your efforts highlighted in there, especially if it's, well, in the regions if it's regional, but nationally if it's national. I invite you all to take a quick look at that, because yeah, it could be of use to you. It's a resilience, it's a resilience tool. Again, it's probably not everything, but if there's things missing in there, I think there's probably a place, if you don't see yourself, for example, to get it stuck in there. They're very good about doing that, at receiving that. So the Climate Resilience Toolkit is supposed to be a type of clearinghouse. Again, you might be able to break it down into heat issues and then urban issues, but I'm not positive on that. I'd have to play with it a little bit.
Thanks, Doug. All right, so we're getting right at time. And one of the things that we're gonna do, we're gonna let all of our panelists, if you have a couple minutes just to stick around, 30 seconds on what your kind of major takeaway is, something maybe you didn't get to say, or you said but you wanna underline. And while we're doing this, Josh is gonna add into the chat several links that our panelists have provided, and also ways to get involved with the Missouri Local Science Engagement Network. So like I said at the beginning, we're really trying to empower local scientists, science enthusiasts to get scientific information and share it with their lawmakers. We have a few different ways to do this. Again, check out the links in the chat. There's also going to be a link for a post-event survey. We'd love for you to fill that out to let us know what sort of programming you'd like to see next. So while Josh is sharing those links, if each of our panelists just wants to real quickly go through and say what their kind of main takeaway, last parting words are. We can start with, let's start with Feng Peng.
All right. Yeah, I think, this is a nice session. But, just follow up what I mentioned about, when we talk about the, regional or the local urban heat island effect, and with the big picture, we have to think about the big picture of climate change. We used to call it global warming, right? And here, one point I want to make is that those two phenomena are two very different phenomena. For example, when we talk about urban heat island, we are looking at the regional and very locally. But when we talk about global warming, it's kind of showing the gradual increase of temperature, globally speaking. However, the point I want to make is that, even though they are kind of distinct phenomena, but let's think about this way. For example, we talk about summertime heat island. It may contribute to global warming by increasing the demand for the air conditioning, right? which will result to additional power plant emissions of the heat, trapping greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and the nitrous oxide. The idea is that my point I want to make is that the strategies that we are thinking about to reduce the heat island, actually, therefore, they can reduce the emissions, which contribute to global warming, which is a kind of global phenomenon. The idea is that it's kind of, to me, a one stone, two birds, right? If we will be able to get some kind of strategy to reduce urban heat, likely we're going to reduce our carbon footprints, and likely we're going to reduce the global warming signal. So I think this is something, just some kind of follow-up thought about those kind of two distinct phenomena, but they are related.
Perfect. Laura?
From a city perspective and a sustainability perspective, sustainability is it's the triple bottom line, the intersection of people, profit, and planet. How we make sure that our environmental issues are taken care of, our people are taken care of, yet we're still economically sound as a city. That's why we have sustainability offices in a city. And taking care of heat islands is a sustainable thing to do. It helps people, it helps businesses, it helps the economy, it helps our carbon footprint. From an environmental standpoint, it helps our air quality because of trees. So it is definitely something that is going to, if cities are interested in taking on urban heat islands, it's going to give them benefits in all aspects of what they're looking for from sustainability.
Great. Doug?
Just very quickly, there's plenty of evidence that, and this is long term, right? Long term, that issues with heat and desirability on where to live will have a cascade effect on population and where they live, and where they end up living. That's probably a better way to say that. I know probably Arizona and places in the Southwest are looking into this a lot more than, or at least contemplating these issues a little bit more than we are, I'd say, in the middle part of the country, for a lot of reasons. But it's something, it's hard to plan for, but it should be on the risk assessment scale somewhere. That's what I would say to cities that are planning for urban heat relief and migration issues. I guess I'd say long haul.
Absolutely. And Brenden, last but not least.
Yeah, thanks again for the conversation. I guess takeaway, I would just maybe come back to the points around health and also what Laura just mentioned around the economy. This is a climate, there's a climate elements to this. It's going to get worse, as Doug is mentioning, but many of the motivators where you can take the current science and help push local policy and get decision makers to get on board will be based on those immediate health, immediate economic impacts and direct shorter term impacts. It's great when you have local leaders who get the big picture in the long term, but many of them don't. And or if they do get it, they still are, they're going to be up for election in 2 years or something like that. So they have a lot of pressure to look and think more short term. So some of those risk factors can really help drive policy action.
Absolutely. All right. I kept y'all 5 minutes longer than I should have. So I want to thank you, Laura, if you have anything else, closing thoughts you want to say. But really, thank you to everybody who showed up today. Thank you to the Washington University Climate Change Program for co-hosting this with us. This was a fantastic event. Thank you so much to our panelists. I've been thinking urban heat islands for the last month in preparation for this event, and I still learned so much. And so I just really appreciate all of your expertise, your willingness to answer questions. This was really fantastic, and happy that I was able to be here. We will stay on. I will stay on this call. If our panelists are able to stick around, feel free, but if you have to go, no worries at all. We kind of do an informal meet and greet if people have questions about how to get involved with the Local Science Engagement Network, questions for our panelists, stick around. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you next month. Our roundtable will be about food insecurity in Missouri.